Hello, everybody. Welcome to one of the demystifying webinars that we have here that we've got throughout September. I am sort of your host for today anyway, so is Matt, and we have also our senior trainers, Jonas and Ellie. So, hi guys. Can you all hear us? This is the question, isn't it? The must question.
Yeah.
So we seem to be getting some good responsive from people. Yes, we can. This is good. Fantastic. We've got about 160 people at the moment. So until everybody says yes, no, I'm not going to do that. So I want to share my screen. Bear with me a second. So show my screen. There we go. You guys can all see my screen, I take it now?
Yep.
Good. The reason why is because, of course, I want to show you a few things before we get going. As I'm sure you're very much aware, we are working on our September webinars at this particular point. Our webinars are being recorded, and all you need to do is just log back in with this link and you will be able to access your recordings. You will get an email 1 hour at the end of our recordings with some information and some various different links to all sorts of stuff, one of which will be the Red Giant recordings. As you may or may not be aware, that our webinars are also appearing on our YouTube channel, which is called Maxon Volume Program Training, and you can see we've got various webinars. Oh, look at those lovely ray gun ones, Ellie?
Shameless plug.
There. They are incredible. Who did them?
I don't know. Geniuses, clearly. And of course, we've got access to our online training program at cineversity.com. I can put all three of these in a link in a minute. So if you have questions for us, obviously do please, just pop up and say hello, and we'll do our best to talk to you guys and answer any questions that you guys have. But I think it's probably time that we kick off. So Jonas, shall I send this over to you?
Yeah, please.
Okay, let me just find you in the list. Here we go.
Here we go. Let me see if this is the right screen here. Share my screen. That is looking good. You should see Cinema 4D now with a cube, a sphere, and a platonic in there. And yep. I'm also gonna switch off my webcam, so we don't need the bandwidth here. Okay, all right. So today we are going to introduce you to our MoGraph toolset, and I prepared this little scene here with the platonics here, the cube, the sphere, and primitives. I mean, cube, sphere, and platonic. And we just want to clone them. And yeah, so I just want to show you where you can do that. And up here, you can see the MoGraph menu. And this is basically what we are going to be, covering today. And you see that the objects here are color-coded differently. And here we've got some green objects. Those are the generators. And the most important one of these is the cloner. It's more or less the heart of MoGraph, in my opinion at least. Then we've got some deformers here, some commands, and also a set of effectors. So usually a MoGraph setup works like this. You create some, clones or MoGraph objects, however you want to call it. And then you modify them by applying some effectors to them. You can also find this MoGraph menu here, where you have the generators here and all of the effectors here on this side. All right, so let's get started with cloning something. And to do so, I just want to make the cube and the platonic invisible. So we just have the sphere in here. So it's not very fancy at the moment, but we will now create a cloner here from this menu. We just click that. And then in order to clone the sphere here, we just need to make it child of the cloner. And here we can see that there are 9 spheres now. So why is that? Let me just select the cloner and have a look at it. In the cloner, we've got different modes here. Right now we are in grid array mode. That's the default, but you can also set this to be linear, for example, and yeah, just add a count, like the count that you want to. You can also go to radial. It's all pretty self-explanatory here. So you can have a radial distribution. You can also have a honeycomb array, like so, or you can clone onto an object. I will show this later. For now, I will just go back to grid array, and let's have a look at what we can do here. I will skip those settings for now and just have a look at the distribution here. And let's set this up to be 10 by 1 by 10. So we've got way more clones, and we just need to, let's say, adjust the distances between those. Right now they are set to 200 centimeters in each dimension, but we can just bring them down to 20 by 20 by 20. And now you can see that the clone density is much higher here. This is per step mode. So if I increase the count, the distance between the clones will still be kept. But there is another mode, which is endpoint mode. And here you can see now that the values here switch to 280 by 0 by 180. And if I bring this up to 500, for example, the distance won't be kept, but the count in that length here will be kept. All right, so let's bring this back. That was just for showing you what we can do here, and I will also bring this back to per step. Then you can also choose from some shapes here or forms. Default is cubic, but you can also set this to sphere, cylinder, or to an object. And then we are already at the point where we can make this look a little bit more interesting. And the first way how you can do that is simply by cloning multiple objects. Right now we are just cloning spheres, but the cloner clones everything that is a direct child of itself. So let me just enable the cube and the platonic again, or make them visible. Here you can see them. And once we select them and make them also a child of the cloner here, you can see that we're cloning all of them. Now, if we go back to, let's say, 10 by 1 by 10, we've got these diagonal distributions of each object, and it looks a little bit more interesting. So what can we do from here? Well, there are two things. First of all, we can adjust the way these clones are distributed. Right now, it is set to iterate, and this means that the cloner has a look at its children, and in this direction, sphere, cube, platonic. And here you can see if we go from the left to the right, it's sphere, cube, platonic, and so on. And this is iterate. And we can also set this to random, for example, and now we've got a random distribution. There are also two other modes, but those are a little bit more advanced. We can cover them in other webinars. For now, we just stick to iterate and random. Okay, I will go back to iterate, and now let's assign some effectors so you get to know the, oh, that's brilliant. Let me just close that software. Here we go. And let's continue. Right, we want to assign an effector here. So let me go to the MoGraph menu and let's have a look at what we can do. So here we've got the effectors, the blue objects, and the most simple one is the plane effector because it does the very same thing to all of the clones. So maybe let's just apply it. And the cool thing is that if you had the cloner selected and apply an effector, it will automatically be assigned. And if we go to the effectors tab here in the cloner, we can also see that the plane effector has been assigned. Now let's have a look at the effector itself. We can clearly see that all of the clones have been moved up. And if we go to the effector tab here. We've got a strength slider. We can blend between the state without the effector and the state with the effector fully applied. And in the parameters tab, we can see what parameters have been adjusted. So by default, everything is moving up by 100 centimeters. So let's bring this down, let's say to 30 centimeters. And let's also introduce some rotation here of 90 degrees. And if we go back to the effector tab and just scrub here, you can see that the clones are moving up and they are also rotating. Okay, good. So, but right now, as I told you earlier, this effector will be applied to all clones with the very same amount. So your question might be, how can I apply the effector but with different strengths on different clones? And the answer is something you can find here in the fall off tab. You have to create a fall off or a weight, a strength for that effector. And you can do that with different shapes, and you can find those shapes in here. We've got a box field, a capsule field, cone field, and so on. Let's just create a spherical field. And a field is basically something that creates a weight inside of Cinema 4D. Fields are the unified weight system all over Cinema 4D. Very powerful thing. And here you can see now that once I move this field, that I apply this effect only to those clones which are part of that field. Okay, let me just do one more thing. I will select the cloner and I will also create some randomness here. So let me create a random effector. Now everything explodes a little bit here. This is because in the parameter tab here, there is a lot of randomness going on in the position parameters. Let's bring this down and let's also randomize the scale. We can do that with the uniform scale. So let's say 0.5, and let's also add some randomization in the rotation. And now we've got a randomization going on all of the clones and moving them up just on these clones within the field. So what if you want to assign the randomization just in the area where the clones have been moved up? It's very simple. You just have to select the random effector, go to its fall off tab, and you can assign the very same spherical field that is on the plane effector simply by dragging and dropping it into the field list here. So this is a whole list. You can also stack those fields and create your own custom fall offs. So now what we did is we're controlling the effect of two fields with just one single field here. And this is way more interesting. So just to tell you everything that I showed you right now, again, we created some clones using the cloner here. Then we added some effect using the effectors, and then we restricted the effect by using a spherical field on both of them. And that's basically the principle behind many MoGraph setups. Just create the generator, create some clones, apply some effect to them, and restrict the effect using the field. So that's it. For now, I would just pass on. Who's next?
That'll be me, I think.
That'll be you. So let me just show me. I think I have to do this here.
There it is. Show my screen.
There it is. All right.
You should see a lovely mountain.
I do.
Right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce you guys to two things, one of which is quite quick. So to start with, I need a sphere. As you can see, it's not particularly exciting. But one of the other things that we have down here, we've got a couple of they're sort of deformers. They're MoGraph deformers as opposed to generators, and they work in the same way as our deformers in Cinema 4D as well, in the fact that they become children of the object that you're trying to do something with. And very quickly, I'm going to create something called a polyFX. And what this means is it allows you to access and use the effectors on the polygons of the object of which it is a child. So let's drag and drop our polyFX into our sphere. And as you can see, very little happens at this particular point because we need to do something. We need to give it some form of effector. So as Jonas has already showed us, with my polyFX selected, if I create a plane effector, as you can see, we use plane effectors quite a lot, you can see all of the stuff jumps up. So rather than the sphere itself, had it been put into a cloner, we can see that this is actually occurring with each of the polygons. Now, the parameters for that are not what I want at all. So I'm going to turn off position for the moment because I don't want it to jump up its position. What I would like to do is to change its scale. And this means that we can affect the individual scales of the polygons in X, Y, and Z, but I'm lazy. So I'm going to use uniform scale, and I'm going to choose -1, which makes them disappear. I'm also going to choose a rotation of about 90 degrees. Now you guys are going to go, but we can't see anything. This is because I need to now add, as Jonas has said, a fall off. So at the moment, this effect, this plane effector, is having a unilateral effect on all of my polygons. It's made them all disappear. So let's create a linear field where we can control where this effect happens. And as you can see, if I drag my linear field now from one side to another, the polygons rotate into existence as well as scale into existence. Now that's okay, but I like to change a few things. If I select my linear field, I can choose +y in the direction, which means that if I choose up and down, then it looks a bit better. So it looks like those polygons are rotating and scaling into existence. It's a bit blocky for the moment, and this is purely because of the number of polygons that exist under the sphere. So at the moment, I've got 16. I'm going to want 4 times that, and because I'm lazy, I can do *4 in these boxes, and it will do my maths for me. So if I just press enter, I now have a lot more polygons in here, and I can just quickly grab my linearFX, and now quite nicely my sphere sort of holograms into existence. You know, many rebels died to bring us these plans, if anybody can get that reference. So that's a quick sort of polyFX use there. Does anybody have any questions on that? That was exceptionally fast, and it feels like that should have taken longer, but it is actually that quick to get some interesting effects like that. If not, I'm going to move on to the next one.
There is actually a couple of questions, but I think it was during Jonas's. So Jay's asked, can you reset cloners to default, or do they remember the last settings?
I don't know if you guys can hear me, but you cut out then, Ellie, for me. Sorry, I don't know what was going on. Yeah, with Jay's question about resetting cloners, there's no sort of cloner reset unless Jonas wants to surprise me with something that I didn't know. But if you just create a brand new cloner, that will sort of have all of its settings set to its default as you create a brand new cloner, but there's no kind of reset. And well done, Jay, for getting the Star Wars reference. Thank you. And also, we have another question. What if I want by effectors only one type of the clones, the cube, for example? Jonas, what do you think? It's not possible. Is it possible to select the clones of the cloner that you only want it to affect the cubes and not the others?
Well, I would say it depends. In iterate mode, it is possible. You would then need a formula effector to do that, because then you can also iterate over the clones and yeah, just apply an effect to, let's say, every 3rd clone. That is possible. But as soon as they are randomized, it is not possible in the MoGraph context, you could, of course, use deformers on that one specific object. So it is, well, possible, but a little bit restricted. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question, could you change the shape of the polygon? That is down to the shape of the polygon. So because this is a standard sphere, my polygons are square. Am I able to send it to anything else? So if I did tetrahedron, then the shapes of the polygons that are being created here are triangular instead. But that's the only way. It is literally allowing me access to the polygons underneath. So depending on whatever shape your polygons are will depend on how they are created. And one more question, would it be a way to extrude the polyFX and still be able to animate it? I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by that. Jonas?
So yeah, if you want to extrude the polyFX, well, you want to apply the polyFX first and then extrude the polygons, I assume. I think that should work with the Mo extrude.
Possibly. So you could use brain that instead.
In addition, after the polyFX, yeah, that works.
Yeah, so you can increase and decrease the number of extrusions out of that before I destroy my machine. Whoops. Good, thank you, Vizan. And someone has asked, is it possible to clone objects in the shape of something like text? Are we going to do more cloner stuff in some of the later MoGraph things this month? Filling shapes, filling volumes, basically, with the cloner.
Yeah, that's also something you could do with the setup that I showed you before. There was this form setting in the cloner, so you can create a grid of like whatever you want, and then set the form to object, and then there will be a link field, and you just drag and drop an object into that, and then you've got the shape. Or you can also just fill an object with random positions using the cloner. That's absolutely possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I set up my cloner 10 by 10 by 10, or you can say there are various different ways you can set this to object, and then I could get a sphere, and in my cloner I could choose object, and I could choose, rather than a vector, I would be able to choose volume. And if I hide my sphere, I definitely need to make my sphere bigger. My cloner I can use to fill the volume of my sphere. That's one way anyway. Okay, right, I need to move on. We'll come back to a few more questions in a bit. So I'm going to introduce you guys now to something called the tracer object. And the tracer object does exactly what you would expect it to do. So if I create an object that I can use to create traces, so let's create a platonic, and with my platonic on my left-hand side of the screen, I'm just going to keyframe it. And then at the end of my animation, at the right-hand side of my screen, I'm going to rotate it 360 degrees in all directions and keyframe it again. And I should now get an interesting sort of rotatory animation. Yep, that's fine. That'll give me some interesting points. Now, what the tracer does, the tracer object literally traces the vertices of the object that you have connected with it. So with my platonic selected, I am going to create my tracer object. Now this time it doesn't need to be a child, so it's automatically associated, as you can see here in the object properties of my tracer. And if I press play, swirly around go the tracer lines. Now, I'm going to hide my platonic because I don't want to see it, but I just want it to exist so that it will create my lines. But as you can see, I've got no lines here. One of the things that I can do to make this a little more interesting is I can create a material that will allow me to see these lines. One of which, under my materials, oh, hello, is a hair material, as odd as that sounds. The hair material is designed in Cinema 4D to allow splines to sort of come to life and be renderable. Now, there are a lot of settings here on the left-hand side to do with the hair material that I am not going to know anywhere near, because it is literally to do with making more hair. The ones I'm really going to focus on at the moment are color and thickness. So color, let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's make it a blue. And at one end, I'm going to make it a pink. And then I'm going to drag and drop my hair material to the tracer object and then press render. And there we can see we've got this interesting tracer object being created and the splines colorized from one side to the other. Another thing that makes this more interesting is using this thickness. Now, it is designed to be a hair, so it's thick at one end and thin at another. If I make that the same distance from one end to the other, you can see that they're a bit thicker. Now, if I whack that up a little bit more, you can see that that line becomes a lot thicker than it did before. And now it starts to feel a little bit more kind of motion graphics-y. These things feel a little bit more alive. But of course, as soon as I try and see what that looks like, everything disappears. So viewport render will just render the splines that I can't see and click OK. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, it's busy chugging away, creating me a quick render, which I can then press play with, and my swirly lines get created. Okay, I'm going to add to that really quickly, because one of the things that I can do with this thickness, I can control its thickness overall. So at the moment, it is 5 centimeters thick from beginning to end. If I control click and start making some more points, then what I can do, I can actually define a shape that these splines are created. And if I render that now, you can see that they've kind of got like an end to them that feels potentially a bit more like they are alive. Ooh, don't go too far over, otherwise it won't work. And with that, I can go back to my color, and using my gradient, I can create another color at one end. And now if I render that, because it's at one end, you can see that the two start to marry up. And so now if I do a quick preview render, doobie-doobie-doobie-doobie-doo, bottom left-hand corner, it's a good job this is fast. Now, my object kind of looks like it's being created with a swirly pattern, and it's creating trails as the kind of fake particles, as it were, disappear along. And to add to that, very quickly, what I can do, in my tracer object, I can get those lines, those trails to disappear after a certain period of time. And this is done under the tracer object with the limit, and go to from end. And that says how many frames from the end do you want this to exist for? And I'm going to say 30, which means any particular part of this will exist for 30 frames. And now you can see that as I go to the beginning, my trails disappear after a certain period of time. To make it look like it fades out, I'm going to just add a nice black color to the end of my gradient so that it looks like it fades out with the background, and then do a quick preview render one more time, and then press play. And now my particles look like the trails disappear and the particles seem to fade out. So that is a exceptionally fast introduction to the tracer object. Okay, so have we got some questions, I believe?
In the meantime, I just want to say that this way of rendering splines using hair is really incredibly fast, and you can render a sequence of like 300 frames in less than a minute, which is really incredible. And then in the end, you can just throw it into a compositing application and make it look even cooler, like with glows and so on. And this technique really literally saved my ass for one project back in the day when I was in production. I can show you later if you want to.
Okay, cool. Right, in which case I'm going to hand over now to Ellie.
Yeah, sure.
There we go.
Can I just double check? Is my mic working okay? Because it cut out earlier.
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Yeah.
We can
Okay,
hear
perfect.
you.
That's good. Cool. Right. So I'm going to take a bit of like another look into the tracer as well, kind of leading on from what Matt's just done. And we're going to look at this. This is a little project I did earlier, and it's like a countdown. So it counts down from like the 3, 2, 1. We use the tracer to create these cool like paths. And so what I'll do, I'll actually go from like start to finish and do a bit of the old speed training. So what we'll start with, we're going to grab like a text spline. So that's a 3. Let's get like a thick font. Which one did I use? That one there. And then we'll drop that into an extrude. I'm just going to copy and paste that so I don't have to repeat that, and just change 1 to 2 and then 1 to 1. Cool. And so with those, I want them, I want to change them to like individual objects. So I can actually just right click and go to current state object. And so you can see there, it's just created a single object for each one. So I can delete those splines in the extrudes, and that leaves just my 3, 2, and my 1. So if I hide them, you can see them. They're just overlapping a little for now, but that's fine. So another quick thing I have to do, I want my axis to be in the center. At the moment, it's kind of at the back and at the bottom, but I'm going to add some rotation. I want it to rotate from the center on each of my objects. So with that, I can just come up to mesh, go to axis, and then axis center. And if I hit execute, it puts that into the middle, and I can do that on each of my objects just quickly. Cool, so they're all now like centered. I'm just going to group those into a null, and then we're going to add some MoGraph stuff. If I grab my fracture, which is another of the MoGraph generators, I'm going to drop my null into my fracture. And then now what I can do, I can add things like effectors like Jonas showed, and also the tracer. So with the fracture selected, I can come into MoGraph and I can get my plane effector. But what I don't want to affect the position, I just want to affect the rotation. And so all we're going to worry about is the H and the P, these first two. So I'm going to set some keyframes now to set up my rotation. So I'm going to hit keyframes because I want it to start on 0. And then on frame 30, I'm going to go 180 and then minus 180. And I'm going to click the keyframe again, because then it's going to record that movement. And then the next movement is just up to 360. And then set another keyframe. And so that's my rotation. At the moment, it looks a bit messy because obviously the visibility of the 3, 2, and the 1 is all 100% at the moment, but I'll change that in a little bit. Before I set up the tracer, so because my first movement is 180 degrees, what I also need to do, so if I hide those, my 2 is going to be effectively upside down. So I need to make sure I rotate that 180. So now by the time that gets to frame 30, it's actually the right way around. Cool, right, so that's my rotation set up. So now with the fracture selected again, we can come up and we can grab our tracer. And then what we want to make sure we do is set handle cloners to immediate clones, because if that was set to nodes only, it isn't going to create the paths. So if I play that now, you can see it's creating these paths. At the moment, they've got no kind of frame that they die on. So we can go from end, sort of similar to what Matt did, but I'm going to set it to 5 frames. So now that it's like tracing those paths, but it's also then kind of like it kills it after 5 frames. Cool, right now we can look at changing the visibility of my objects. So it actually shows the 3, 2, 1 countdown. So if I select my 3 objects, you can go right click, and under render you have display tags, and I've got loads of options in here, but all we want to look at is the visibility. So for this, we can now start keyframing the visibility of our countdown. So what we're going to start with, so we'll need my 3 to be on 100%, and then again at frame 14, and then down. There's a couple of keyframes for this, but it's worth it because it looks quite clean. Now on my 2, I'll go back to frame 14, no visibility, and then back up to 100%, and then up to 44, hit another keyframe, and then have it disappear. And then the last one, set my visibility to 0, and then back up to 100. So now when I play that through, it counts down, and that was pretty much how I created that look. All I did as well, I added similar to what Matt did, grab your hair material, and then I like the neon pink and the neon blue. I think they look really cool. So I'm going to shove that on my tracer, and I also animated the color of the material. So I had it start pink. Was it pink and then blue, or blue then pink? I'm not sure. So I can set a keyframe on my color, and then at frame 60, set a keyframe again, then throw that on my fracture, and then it should go from pink to blue. And that was what I did for, not got it up now, have I? For
We've got a question, Ellie. Someone's asked,
Yeah.
please can you elaborate on the step of clone handles? Although I'm not sure you were dealing with.
So in my tracer, wasn't it? So this here, right? So if I'm being totally honest, I'm not too sure. I only know because I'm dealing with the MoGraph, it works under immediate clones. I mean, Jonas perhaps knows the answer better than I do. Jonas?
I would also give it a try first. I cannot answer that right away.
As you can see, we've got, I mean, motion graphics is huge, and the number of options that we have are also infinite, I think, with the number of things that we could create. So sometimes we need to look things up. But Ken Phillips has just asked, what does the fracture really do? The fracture allows you to use various mini objects and use the effectors on the subpolygons of it. So on the sort of like the subcomponents of it. So it allows you to treat the 3 different objects as something that can be used with the effectors.
Yeah,
Cool.
so it can bring every single object you have in your scene into the MoGraph context. That's basically what the fracture object does.
Cool. Also about the handle cloners, a little useful tip, you can actually right click and go to show help on a bunch of stuff in Cinema 4D, and you can actually have a quick read about what those settings do. Because yeah, I'm not 100% sure of everything, unfortunately.
None of us are. Cinema is too big for that.
It is a huge program. Right, cool.
Yep.
Really quickly, I'm going to show one more thing, and it is how to create this kind of thing. which is also using the tracer, as well as like some OpenVDB stuff, and then I'll pass it back over. So this is like quite quick to set up. So if I do a new project, if I grab myself a null, throw that into a cloner, my cloner is going to be set to grid array, which is cool, 3 by 1 by 3. That's what I need it as. And then with my cloner selected, I can go up to effectors and then random. And then this time we do want the position. And a really cool thing about the random effector is if you go into effector and then change the random mode to turbulence and then set the animation speed to like 10%, you get this really cool kind of animation without having to like keyframe anything. And then with that, we can actually then like trace that movement. So if we grab our tracer, so it now is tracing kind of the path that like the random effector is causing like the null to move. And then what we can do, we can actually get our volume builder, drop our tracer into it. Don't worry about how it looks for now. Change our voxel size down to something like 1. And then our tracer, I think, what did I do? It was like 5 and 2. And then we can shove that into a mesher. And let me just show us smooth. And now you get this like really cool organic kind of like growth. And all you've really done is kind of set up like a cloner and a random effector and kind of using like the OpenVDB stuff to create the geometry. And I think it just looks like quite cool and quite like abstract. And then for mine, I just literally threw like a texture with a gradient on, my colors of the day, pink and blue. And just sort of like chuck that on there. And I think it looks quite nice and quite like simple to set up. And you can just change the parameters of your position. Let's say if you were to like move it around a little bit to get like a different kind of abstract movement. It's not quite as exciting, but yeah, that was just like a quick thing. That was the render I did earlier for it. And yeah. So yeah, that was 2 little mini projects on the tracer. And what we'll do as well, I can actually send these project files over with like the link that you'll get to this recording, so you can always break these down and just have a little look as to how I did those.
Brilliant, thank you. Do we have any questions? Say it's been relatively quiet on the question front today.
It does.
Is there anything else you wanted to show, Jonas? The trouble is, obviously, with
so I think, yeah, Jonas.
motion graphics and stuff that we've got coming, of course, we can't dip into the things that we've got occurring in the next few weeks.
I've got stuff to show.
Yeah, shall I ping it over to you then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me fire that over to you. There you go.
Here we go. Now you should see a black box, and the rest of the screen should be Cinema 4D almost. So I wanted to, well, first of all, I want to say that it's really funny, Ellie, that you're using pink and blue so often, because I do that too.
The best colors.
especially when it comes to hair rendering. And yeah, let me just go back to hair rendering a little bit. So here's the thing where the workflow of rendering hair using rendering splines using the hair material just saved me. Yeah, just really saved me. So I just hit play, and what you see here, it's just, well, I just let the animation play here, and you can see that there are various instances that I mixed together using After Effects in the end. So I traced them with connect each other, and with linear splines here, for example, then with yeah, round splines, and I also attached some little nulls to them. So that was one setup. This is another setup. This is also using the very same technique. I just made some particle emitters follow the splines here, or the shapes, and those particle emitters just emitted the particles which died around here, and then I traced them, and this looks very organic. And yeah, so this was something really cool. And as you can see, I also started with pink and blue here, and then I just adjusted the hue values for the different layers. It's pretty much the same, just layered on top of each other. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share here. So, and that was really a project where I had 3 days, I think, to create 6 minutes of animation. And this technique really saved my life because it made it possible. It was for a building projection. And yeah, exactly. So that's what I wanted to show here. Now, let's continue.
Got a question for you,
yes.
Jonas.
Yes.
Interesting that a few people have asked the same thing. Like a melted text effect. If we wanted to show something similar of the sort of melted wax effect, but attached to the movement of the shape instead of splines, how would you do it differently? The end result aiming for shapes melting into combined shapes and separating again.
Well, I would do a setup with the inheritance effector, basically, because the inheritance effector allows you to bring clone from one shape to another, and then you could trace the paths and throw that into a volume builder and use OpenVDB to mesh it, like the technique you saw just a minute ago. And I think that could work, definitely.
Possibly one of the an idea to look at for one of our more advanced MoGraph sessions.
Yeah, there are always multiple ways. This would be the first way I would try, because it keeps things well, relatively simple.
Cool, thank you.
All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you is how I created this here. And so I guess, unfortunately, the frame rate of the webinar software is not too high. So I scrub through the timeline here a little slower. And what you can see here is basically a structure, a repetitive shape, or a repetitive pattern that I created using MoGraph. And then I just deformed it using simple deformers. So let me show you how I created this. We start with a new scene, and I create a torus here. So this is my torus. Let me make the radius a little bit smaller. Maybe let's go for 20. And then I bring down the ring segments to 6. So this way we get a hexagon. And I also bring down the pipe segments to 8. And if we go to display Gouraud shading with lines, we see the topology of this thing, and it's looking good. So I make this editable. So I turn it into a polygon object, because now I've got access to the points, the edges, as well as to the polygons. And I can now select points here and delete them. And to make that a little bit faster, I go to select and choose loop selection. I use this ring, and I also want to select this ring, and I just hit delete, and now I've got a torus, well, half a torus. So what can we do with that? We can clone it. And here's another cool tip. If you have an object selected and you hold down Alt while you create a generator or any other object, this new object will be created as a parent object immediately, so you don't have to create the hierarchy yourself here. Okay, in the cloner, I choose the mode from grid array to honeycomb array, and the orientation to Y. And here's one little thing that Matt showed earlier, which is incredibly helpful. So what you see here is that the distribution is way too big. So we've got gaps in between here, and but it pretty much seems like it's just twice as big as it should be. So I go to the size width and size height, and I just set the cursor here and type in divided by 2. That looks good. And I do the same with this value here, divided by 2. And here we go. Now it's one grid here. All right. So that's a good start. Now let's create a subdivision surface and make the cloner a child of it. I could have pressed Alt, but I didn't. And now you see, okay, this doesn't look as expected because of two things. One thing is it's not hexagons anymore, but circles. And the second thing is that they are not connected here. So it's not one object. So first, let's get rid of the circles and let's make it hexagons again. Therefore, I will deactivate the subdivision surface as well as the cloner. And in points mode, I go to mesh, cut. Well, I have to select the torus, of course, mesh, cut, loop path cut, and I will set one cut here, and then I will just hit the plus button up here and another time. So I have got 3 cuts and they are distributed equally here. And I will also check reuse cuts here, which is one of my favorite checkboxes in the knife tool, in the loop cut tool, because now I can just click on the edges here and I will just create 3 cuts for all of them. Without doing the without pressing plus every time I do that. All right, so let's enable the subdivision surface, and let's also go to grow shading. And now it looks like a hexagon. So let's bring back the cloner, and you see it's looking much better, but they are still not connected. So we've got the holes in here. So we need something that can connect objects or clones in this case. All right, how can we do that? I just pulled that out of the subdivision surface because I want to create one more object in between here. And I get this from the mesh generators here, and there is an object called connect. So I create that connect object and I place it on top or as a parent of the cloner, and have a look at the viewport here and you see something was happening. We don't have the sharp edge here on top. Somehow it was, or it has been melted together. And now I will make the connect a child of the subdivision surface. And here we go. It's much better now. But you can see that there are some, well, let's say artifacts here in the shading. We've got a hard shading line here and there, and we can get rid of that in the connect object simply by adjusting the Phong mode, because this comes from the Phong breaks, and set it to highest. So here you see that we now got really smooth shading and smooth object. The good thing is that except for the torus object here, this is still completely procedural. So we could just deactivate everything and go to points mode and, well, yeah, cut here. And then let's go to the loop selection tool just to select a few rings here, those two maybe. And then let's go to mesh, extrude, and we extrude that to the inside. And if we are finished, we just bring back all of the others and we see that this has been cloned over to all of the others. All right. And also, if we want to make this a little bit bigger here, the whole area, we just go to the cloner and type in, this should be 20 by 20 maybe. And this way, we now have a bigger hexagon shape. All right. Now this is completely flat, and it's always a good idea to create your stuff flat and then curve it or bend it afterwards, because creating things flat just gives you a lot of options that you don't have anymore once it's curved. And yeah, so let's start making a cylinder out of that. And to do so, I'm going to create a bend deformer like so. And if we have a look at the object tab and play with the strength, you can see that, well, it's bending like in Y direction. We want it to be rotated by 90 degrees here, like so. And then we need to place that deformer here in the hierarchy, just underneath the connect. And we say fit to parent. And now it is as big as the whole object. We want to keep the axis length, and then we can play with the strength here. And what I will do is I'll type in, I think it was something like 365.1 or so. That was kind of good, or 0.2. Or even more, maybe like so. Yeah, that is good. And now we just need to bring that back somehow to the middle here. I always like that because new objects are always appearing here in the scene origin. So let me go to the front view. And in here, I'm going to create a null. And I move the null over and eyeball it so that it's somewhere near the middle of this ring. And then I make the whole thing a child of this null, because now I can just hit reset PSR and this will bring it back to the center of the scene. All right, with a middle click, you can go to 4 views, and with a middle click here on perspective, you can make the perspective the main window again. All right, so now let's rotate this whole guy by 90 degrees, something like that, just that the seam here is not on top, but somewhere where we don't see it. And the next thing I want to do, and this is also the last thing for that setup, is I want to create a bulge deformer. And the bulge also has to be rotated. Let me just show you what the bulge does. So here you can see it a little bit. It makes an object thicker or thinner, but we need to rotate it like so, 90 degrees, and then scale it up like so. And then we just place it here beneath the bend. And now we can adjust the strength, and the whole thing, yeah, will just be blown up. And we can also create a fillet here. And now if we zoom in here and move that deformer, you can see that we're creating those waves. We can also do that with multiple deformers, multiple bulge deformers. And yeah, you can see that this is working pretty well. All right, that is basically the technique behind that. We are also a little bit running out of time, but I'm finished here. So are there any questions?
That was excellent, Jonas. I liked that. I got the feeling you may have demoed that one before.
I showed it to you a few years ago. At Vertex in London.
You did. That was it, exactly.
Yeah.
So, no, we seem to be quite quiet on the question field to say we've got a whole 2 minutes. We're not used to this, are we? So
no.
Normally it's 6 minutes after.
Hashtag we never overrun.
People have been really positive though, really loving the stuff, and we're glad you're really enjoying it. Yeah, let us know what you want us to show as well, because obviously we'll be doing a bunch of more advanced stuff in the next few weeks as well.
Of course, exactly. Yeah, we've got our MoGraph. We're looking at the Voronoi, aren't we? We're looking at fracturing. We're looking at field. And of course, next week we have all of the cool stuff that you really need to know.
Yeah, so there are 3 more sessions, all the cool stuff you really need to know. Then after that, we will have a look into fields and create a few more advanced field setups. And the last Monday webinar in September will be about fracturing and how you can use it in the motion graphics context, because there's some really exciting stuff that you can do that doesn't even remind you of a Voronoi fracturing object. So that is pretty exciting stuff.
We've got a few questions really quickly to try and wrap up in the next sort of 59 seconds. Good grief. Can you use deformers on a tracer spline? I think no.
On a tracer spline?
Because
No.
they're not real.
No. So we had kind of a similar question earlier. So if you want to deform a traced spline, I would try, I'm not sure if that is going to work, but I would try using the tracer in a MoSpline object, because you can link a spline into a MoSpline object, and then you will have all of the power of MoGraph on splines. So you could use effectors on the spline. I didn't try that before, but that's the way that should work.
Yeah. About your last one, if there wasn't a connect generator used, where would the bulge and bend deformer be placed? They would be added as could be added as a child of the subdivision surface underneath the cloner or the null, couldn't they? And they would still have the same effect.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing with deformers. They can be applied in two ways. One way is to make them a child of an object that you want to be deformed, and this way it would really just affect that one object. In this case, we want to deform a whole hierarchy, and the way you can do that is to place the deformer on the same hierarchical level as the objects that you want to deform. In this case, everything starting from the connect up should work.
And the last question regarding the tracer, I think, can the spline be lengthened and aligned to spline or tracer? Sorry, can the cylinder be lengthened and aligned to spline? The cylinder of what? Sorry, Cameron, I'm not quite sure I follow.
Where's the question? I cannot see that.
Right down the bottom.
Can the cylinder?
The mesh cylinder we just created. Oh, I see. The sort of mesh we've just. Oh, can it be lengthened and aligned? Yes.
Yes. There is. Well, in this case, it's quite heavy. But the workflow would be to use a deformer that is called spline wrap. And in the spline wrap deformer, you define a spline where you want to make that you want this spline to follow along. And well, that's basically it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So he's obviously had enough. So is it yawning there in the background? Yep, he's definitely gone. Right. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us for our demystifying MoGraph. And join us all three again next week for all of the cool stuff that you really need to know. And it was, so it's goodbye from me.
Well, one more thing. Maybe you should also tune in tomorrow and for the rest of the week, because right now is the time of IBC, and we're having a 3D and motion design show at 3dmotionshow.com. So if you want to watch some cool presentations and watch some exciting Maxon stuff, maybe you should tune in.
The link to that I have just put in the chat. So if anybody wants to go and have a nose at anything that comes out of the next few days at IBC, obviously go and check that out.
Yeah, so here I'm going to open it up. This is the website, and we've got a cool event schedule. So it will start tomorrow at 8:30 PST. Oh, that's interesting. It's automatically translated to German, but in the wrong way. Interesting. Yeah, so it will start with our CEO, David McGavran. So there might be exciting stuff. Who knows? Just watch it.
Wait and see.
All right.
All right, so you'll have an hour, about an hour after this, you'll get an email with more information about this webinar. And for anybody who's missed it or wants to go and get it, then you will have the link to be able to, you have to re-register, but nonetheless, you will just get to the recording and not a live webinar. But from the three of us, unless anybody else has anything else to say, then have a good evening, and we will catch you next week.
Yeah, see you all next week.
See you next week.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.